Hello. I visited basically every doctor, but stuff still happened. So what's lots of ailments for your boy recently, one of which was a thing that I went to a doctor and he was like, I'm gonna cut that, okay? Just for fun? Just to take it home to the kids? Anyway, I might be fine. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. Before we begin, I just want to say that there's been a lot of bad news recently. A lot of it. I'm very aware of that. And I'm also very aware that a lot of my episodes this year have been nothing but bummers. Now, a lot of that is because I feel it's important for people to be aware of what's going on so that we can take action. But also, it's important to not just have a relationship with the world that is one of watching it in despair. It's really easy to feel like bad news is global and catastrophic, and good news is local and small. But that's not the case. And I don't mean good news like this local kid set up a lemonade stand to pay for his mother's cancer treatment. I mean actually good news. So for today's episode, and for the sake of my mental health and my therapist's mental health, we're going to talk about good stuff. And so with all of that said, I would like to talk to you about your cervix. To send an invitation to the cervix party. What's up? Cervical cancer. It sucks. It's bad. Cancer sucks. And I don't like it when cancer goes on cervixes. Cervical cancer is a big deal. It's like the 8th most common cancer in the world and the 9th deadliest. It's not fun. It's often caused by HPV, human papillomavirus, which is a thing that anyone can have regardless of presence of a cervix. HPV is the most common STI. It affects men and women and everyone in between and outside. You don't have to be in between. But this is the good news show. Why are we talking about cervical cancer? Because it's going down. Get wrecked, cancer. Across the world, we're making strides against cervical cancer, and a lot of it has to do with the HPV vaccine. Now, I want to say, up front, I am the proud son of a gynecological nurse who pounded into my head as I was a teenager that I should get the HPV vaccine, and all the boys that I know should do the same. The reason for that is, again, boys can have HPV and pass it along to a woman that they truly love, who then gets it and has it far worse. But the HPV vaccine has done so much that Australia is now predicting that they will eradicate cervical cancer by 2035. Another study in the UK found that for women aged 20 to 24, there were exactly 0 cervical cancer-related deaths in the past 5 years. While young women are not usually the ones that are going to die from cervical cancer, they can. That the expected number would have been in like the 20 to 30 range for that same time period. But instead it was 0. Because we said, fuck you, HPV. There's a ton of variations of HPV, and it can be all sorts of stuff. It might be like warts on your hand or just bumps somewhere else. Very innocuous, until it's not, because it, again, progresses to cancer for certain people. So just remember, before you stroke, go get the poke. Let's move on to trees. We're getting mangrovey with the mangrove trees. They're coming back. Mangroves. They're all over the place in Minecraft and in the real world. They are those trees with like the wild roots that are like sort of above ground. They're all tangly. They like to hang out on riverbanks, and they do a lot. They do a lot for us. In addition to looking pretty good when you right-click it with an axe equipped, mangrove trees are really good at storing carbon and retaining riversides. Basically, they make sure that ecosystems coexist, function. Mangrove forest coverage has been on decline for a long time, and it still hasn't really reached local maximums, right? It's still not wonderful. But while we thought that they were just declining for 40 years straight, a recent study looking over 40 years of satellite data found that they're actually on their way back over the past 10 to 15 years. While we haven't recovered completely, the trend is that mangrove forests are returning, and returning pretty strong. It's early, and these are trees, right? Like they have to take root and do well for a while before they're like truly sturdy, but it's a really good direction to be moving. Mangrove trees hold an outsized amount of carbon for their size. So as they're growing, they're taking carbon and bringing it down well below the soil, storing it down there. When deforestation happens and all those mangroves are ripped up, that carbon is emitted. And a lot of it isn't even just in the tree's actual biomass. Again, it's brought down underground. So quite literally, mangroves can help prevent climate change. Like, that's how important these twisty boys are. This is great. This is good. It's really amazing that mangrove trees are coming back. And the reason for that is focused conservation efforts. It's not like they're just accidentally coming back. The resurgence is not uniform worldwide. There are some places where conservation efforts are being stifled. For example, Myanmar has been doing a lot of conservation efforts, but is now in a brutal civil war. Kind of hard to focus on the mangroves during that. But Louisiana, the Mississippi River Delta, probably other places, man, they're getting grovey. All right. Let's talk about the Supreme Court. This is a good news episode, and I'm doing good news, and the Supreme Court doesn't really jive with good news right now. I'm not going to ignore reality. The Supreme Court of the United States recently put out a ton of extremely detrimental decisions. They range from giving the president a whole bunch of more unchecked power to giving the president a whole bunch of more unchecked power and hurting trans kids. A lot of really bad shit, and that's real. But I'm going to ignore that for my blood pressure, and we're going to talk about the one ruling they did do that was like kind of chill a little bit if you squint. Geofenced warrants is a concept where law enforcement can be like, okay, a crime took place in this area. Hey, Google, give me everyone's information who is in that area at this time. I really hope I triggered your Google Assistant with that. So yeah, law enforcement can be like, just give me just everyone who was near this crime. I want their location data. Obviously, this can lead to some unfortunate situations, like just claiming that someone who was near a crime was actually the perpetrator. No, well, all evidence points to the perpetrator having been in this location at this time, and you were in this location at this time. The Supreme Court has ruled that that data is in fact protected by the Fourth Amendment. What that means is that they actually need to get a warrant to do these now. It's not like they've gotten rid of this process, but they did say if you're going to do that, you need a warrant, which means you need an actual concise reason to do so. You can't just say like, I think that I kind of generally want to have information on the people who were sort of around here. You instead have to say like, we have probable cause to believe that this specific person was in this specific area, and we can prove it if you give us this information that we go through a judge for. The Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect you from unreasonable search and seizure, which it's pretty unreasonable for the government to just silently be able to track where you are at any time. I know a lot of people fully believe that that is already the case, right? A lot of people believe that once you've given up your location data, that's it. You have no expectation of privacy. And I want to tell you, that was Donald Trump's argument. The argument made by the Trump administration to the Supreme Court about why the law enforcement officers should be able to just mass gather people's data was exactly that. They argued that once people turn on their location data, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy after that. Now, this has actually been a problem for a while, to the point that Google recently updated Google Maps to move the location data history service off of their servers and onto your phone so that they don't have that data anymore. If law enforcement goes to Google and says, give me all these people's data, and Google says, oh, we don't have that, then there's nothing to give over. This is actually something, and I'm just going to kind of tangent here real quick into a mini Technology Boy episode. It's actually really smart to design software to hold as little information as possible. The MO of most big tech companies right now is just inhale as much data as you can, slurp up everything and never let it go. And what do you have when you have all that data? A bunch of very sensitive information. If you didn't want to have to deal with a whole bunch of regulations, just don't have all that data in the first place. It is all entirely optional. Google obviously didn't need to store all that location data on their servers because they were happy to move it to phones to avoid dealing with law enforcement. Having that data on their servers makes it easier for them to query it to sell ads and whatnot, and they're probably still doing a whole bunch of shady connections and whatnot to make sure that they're still able to do that. But the whole point of not having data is to avoid responsibility, which is entirely at odds with this current surveillance capitalism boom that we're in. But it's interesting, right? Like, I myself am currently working on a project, more information on that another time, in which I'm designing it to specifically not retain more data than is absolutely necessary to function. It's because I want to respect my users' privacy, and also, I don't want to be responsible for that shit. Oh, it's so hard. You have to comply with GDPR and all these other data regulations. You don't have to comply with them if you don't have a whole bunch of bullshit that you shouldn't have in the first place anyway. It makes it really easy to comply when you've designed your software to not just absorb everyone's entire life story. I'm rambling now. Anyway, fuck the SCOTUS. Like, this is nice. Yay. The cops can't arbitrarily just siphon off people's location data. Also, the Supreme Court is a stacked bench full of religious zealots who are looking to destroy this country due to their open contempt for the Constitution that they claim to be scholars of. We have 6 hyper-conservative religious zealots and 3 centrists sitting on our Supreme Court making decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people at a time. This is a good news episode. This is a good news episode. This is a good news episode. Doom. Can you run Doom on a workers' union? id Software, the developers behind Doom and Quake, have recently unionized. About 165 of their 185 or so employees have unionized with CWA, the Communication Workers of America. The union includes developers, artists, QA people, support people, everyone who's basically not a manager. It is a wall-to-wall union covering a whole bunch of different jobs, and Microsoft, the parent company of id Software, acknowledged the union, like voluntarily. Way to go, Microsoft, except not really. Not really. You almost got it. Microsoft almost had some good PR. Not through me! Back in 2022, Microsoft wanted to buy Activision Blizzard, and when they were doing that, they needed to make good with a bunch of various regulators. Biden was in office at the time, the regulators were not as actively criminal as they are now, and Microsoft was like, hey, look, okay, if you let us move forward with this deal, we promise not to do union busting for several years. So they've actually made a signed agreement that basically restricts them from union busting until that agreement expires. So yay, Microsoft did voluntarily recognize this union immediately, but I wouldn't get used to that. The union having actually come together is a big deal. It's a massive first step, voting and actually forming the union, and it's part of a larger trend of digital workers unionizing. Even just among Microsoft, you've got Bethesda and ZeniMax both unionized. And with id, they've unionized, but they haven't actually come to their first contract yet, which is the thing that actually matters. Right now, it's just like, yeah, you're a union. We acknowledge that, but nothing's changed. Landing the contract is what would actually get them, benefits. That's going to be the real next step and the big struggle. But there are now thousands of unionized tech workers in America, where just a few years ago, that was essentially unheard of. As the tech industry continues their pivot out of nascent, exciting new industry and into legacy industrial complex, we're watching as workers go from having relatively decent salaries and work-life balance into absolute nonstop grind. Get out if you're mad about it. I can say, as someone who was completely ground down and spat out by the tech industry, that during my many years in that industry, I didn't meet a single person who had an optimistic end goal that involved staying in tech. Everyone wants to get out and live in a cabin in the middle of the woods. And so as efforts continue to try to unionize more workplaces, remember, unions are also on the rise in terms of favorability nationwide. 68% of Americans have positive views of labor unions. That's 90% of Democrats, 68% of independents, and less than 50% of Republicans. 49? Can I remember stats? 47. I was close. While I would love for that number to be at 100%, because it's literally just, do you support workers having a right to demand that they get reasonable compensation? That answer should be yes. But I get it. Misinformation, and also just like years of propaganda, stuff like that. Anyway, yay unions, good news. And with that, we're on to lightning round, of which I will say it gets a little less perfectly good here. So, lightning round. Comcast is planning to spin out NBC, Universal, and Sky into their own studios, and they're going to be splitting their stock and giving people who are currently invested in Comcast stock in all of those companies. Weeks back, Pete Hegseth said that the flu vaccine was going to become optional in military recruits, and that was a bad idea. Because shortly after that, there was a flu outbreak, with hundreds of service members getting the flu, and they rolled back that policy. Weird! Speaking of the US and war, shocker! It turns out that there's a lot more damage that was done to US bases abroad around Iran than was previously reported. And to be clear, this is coming from the Wall Street Journal. Like, they looked into satellite imagery to find, holy shit, our bases got blown the fuck up. Ford, the auto company, they hired back 350 veteran employees that they previously fired because they were like, we're going to replace you with AI. And finally for today, some dudes in the UK took a bulldozer and used that and a truck to rip an ATM out of a building and take it away. Whoa, it's a bold play. It's a bold play. What can I say? My favorite part is that the guy driving the heavy machinery has like a ski mask on. Like, you're not going to catch me, coppers, as I'm in this giant heavy machinery. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Stuff Keeps Happening. Head to skh.news for sources, bonus content, and your share of the ATM that I stole. My name is Endeavorance. We'll talk again soon. Take care and be well.